Good evening, Lower Shore and friends joining us for Around the State. On the off chance you do not know who I am, my name is Jared Shablon, and I am the chair of the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus. So tonight we're going to have a very important town hall, which is focusing on one major purpose, answering the question, does Katie Kern O'Malley deserve your vote for Attorney General? The mission here of the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus is to elect progressive candidates at every level of office, as well as passing progressive reform at the local, state, and federal level. I'll let folks know before we jump into it, we are going to be at Juneteenth this week. Not Juneteenth, sorry, Salisbury Pride this weekend in downtown Salisbury. You can find more information on it on this very same social media page that you are watching us. With that being said, I want to go ahead and turn it over. We have a wonderful candidate joining us tonight in Judge Katie O'Malley, and I believe we have a clip to play to kind of introduce her.
Maryland is a really special place for me. I've lived here all my life. I love this state. It's the best place in the world. I grew up just a few blocks from where I live now, and my parents live right down the street. My father, Joe Curran, is the epitome of integrity. He's one of the longest-serving public servants that we've had in our state. He was in the House of Delegates, he was in the state Senate, he served as lieutenant governor, and then as the longest-serving attorney general in the state of Maryland. My father was a pioneer in the fight for civil rights. As a kid, I think my parents instilled in all of us the notion that everyone needs to be treated equally, everyone deserves justice, and everyone deserves a chance, a fair chance. When Martin and I first got married, I was attending law school at night and working my days as a law clerk in the state's attorney's office. My last year of law school, I was pregnant with my daughter Grace. I gave birth to her and then took the bar exam in July. I began my career in Baltimore County as an assistant state's attorney, and then I was appointed for the past 20 years to the District Court of Baltimore City as a judge. I think I had a reputation of being tough but fair. The people that were there in the courtroom expecting justice deserved that. I have the right experience to be Maryland's next Attorney General on day one because of the 30 years that I've spent every day in the courts working with people day in and day out. As Attorney General, I will work hard to protect Marylanders from violent crime and at the same time be a crusader for criminal justice reform. People need an Attorney General that's going to stand up for them, fight for them, and pursue justice for them every single day. And that's why I want to be Maryland's next Attorney General.
Thank you so much for joining us, Judge O'Malley. How are you doing this evening?
Great, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful. Before we jump into the questions, I hope you don't mind if we share a little bit about why our organization has decided to endorse you.
Sure.
So the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus, in full transparency, has already endorsed Judge O'Malley because she, as she mentioned in the clip, she has over 30 years of experience. She's tried cases. She's been a judge. She also has the most robust plan of any candidate running for Attorney General, whether it's the environment, women's rights, consumer protections. If there's an issue that the Attorney General deals with, she already has a full ranged plan on her website to address it. Not only just, historically the Eastern Shore has been abandoned. Katie and her entire family have made it a point to come out to the Eastern Shore to make plans for the Eastern Shore and to support our work here on the shore. So that is why we are endorsing Katie. I hope at the end of tonight's questions, and once you have a chance to hear from her and ask her some questions, that you will also agree with us in our endorsement and support her. With that being said, we'll go ahead and jump right into the questions. And the first one maybe is the most important. What is the role of the Attorney General?
So, Jared, the role of the Attorney General is multifaceted, if you will. There are so many different areas that the Attorney General's office touches on Marylanders' lives. That's why it's so important. They call it a down ballot race. It's really not. The Attorney General of Maryland deals with issues involving public safety, criminal justice reform, consumer protection, and certainly the environment, as well as representing the state of Maryland whenever there is a claim against the state. So if the state's sued, the Attorney General's office defends that. Whenever there's a contract that the state enters into, the Attorney General's office attorneys review that contract. We make sure that the procurements of millions of dollars of taxpayers are being used in our state's best interest, in our people's best interest. So there are 19 different units in the AG's office. Again, those three really important issues that deal with consumers, public safety, the environment are big, big issues, but there are also other issues when it comes to child support, when it comes to collections for debts that are incurred by the state against others. AGs do that type of work when it comes to juvenile justice reform. So there's about 450 lawyers that do all that great work, and your attorney general leads them and has to be someone that is not necessarily a subject matter expert on all of these areas, because lawyers cannot be, but has to be someone that understands our judicial system and knows what it's like to go to court. I'm the only one in this race in the Democratic primary that's been a real trial lawyer. I'm the only one that's tried a criminal case in the state of Maryland, not just as a prosecutor, but then when I became a judge, I presided over criminal and civil cases. So you need to have that breadth of experience when you're talking about leading lawyers that go to court, because that's the main job of the Attorney General's office, leading these lawyers who represent all of us.
So, speaking of that experience, how will you use that experience to be different from attorney generals in the past? I know we've had Attorney General Frosch for quite a long time. What do you have a different vision, or is there something that kind of sets you apart from who've served us before?
Well, we've had some really great attorney generals. We've had the four past attorney generals, Steve Sachs, Joe Curran, Doug Gansler, and Attorney General Frosch have all been really phenomenal AGs. And they also have one thing in common. They have all been trial lawyers. So they all have that experience of what it's like to represent Marylanders or represent people in a case, in a criminal case or a civil case. And the thing that you want in an attorney general is someone that can lead and strategize with the lawyers that will be representing Marylanders every single day, whether there are big, big cases involving consumer protection issues like tobacco or the opioid crisis, or smaller cases involving issues of automobile issues or landlord tenant disputes. So you want an AG who can lead lawyers that go to court. And the last four AGs, like I said, have all been experienced trial lawyers, not just legislators. Two of them were not even legislators at all, but experienced trial lawyers that can lead when we're talking about the rule of law, because that's really the thing that we're dealing with here. When you're running the AG's office, it's what's the rule of law, not what's the rule of politics.
Speaking of the Attorney General's office, this isn't something that's new to you. Your father was the Attorney General for 20 years. The experience of growing up with someone who, and he was also quite popular on the Eastern Shore, I might add, having the experience of your father being in that position for so long, how has that really impacted you, and what approaches do you take that kind of molded you for this position in politics in general?
Well, I grew up with two phenomenal parents. So my dad, who was an elected official from the time I was born until just 2007. So for many, many decades, he was in political life. But I also grew up with a phenomenal mom who also had great insight when it came to equity and justice. She's an artist. My dad was a lawyer and also a politician. So having sort of that balance of different views, but really similar values when it came to how we treat people in equity, how, growing up during the civil rights disputes, my father as a legislator was taking some really great positions that were the right positions when it came to segregation, when it came to the Vietnam War, when it came to women's Medicaid funding for abortion for women of lower income. He took the right positions, which were not politically popular. And I think we don't see a lot of spine necessarily in politics nowadays. He was actually such a great leader in that way that showed me that sometimes you have to take positions that aren't popular but are the right thing to do. And people didn't always agree with him, but I think they respected the fact that he explained why he had the positions he had. So it was wonderful growing up in a family with two great parents. My mom had gone to law school early on, so when I got into law school. She was, number one proponent for me to finish. And then my last semester, I was pregnant with my first daughter, Grace, and she made sure she was always there to help me so that I could get through my last semester of law school, take the bar exam, and pass. So I'm really, really lucky to have wonderful people who have, given me the values that I have now here in my my career.
Thank you. Some folks say that you and Congressman Brown have very similar political positions or policy positions. What is it that really separates you two, and why are you the better choice for Attorney General?
Well, sure. So, Congressman Brown has been in politics. I have not. And I've been a lawyer, a public service lawyer, as a prosecutor for a decade and then a trial judge for the past 20 years. And when you're talking about an attorney general, you're talking Marylanders need to hire a lawyer. And do you want to hire a lawyer that's never been in a courtroom and tried a case? Or do you want to hire a lawyer that's tried all kinds of cases and heard all kinds of cases? And that's the difference. He's a fantastic legislator, but he hasn't been in a courtroom for over 20 years, and he's never tried a single criminal case in the state of Maryland. So I think for this position specifically, that's what people are looking for. Like I said earlier, the last four attorney generals all had significant trial experience, not just politics. Two of them had legislative experience, two of them didn't. Steve Sachs and Doug Gansler never had any legislative experience. So it's important that you want an attorney general that can lead lawyers that are going to court. You can strategize with them. You can work with them in the organized crime division when it comes to criminal cases. And I've tried hundreds of criminal cases in front of judges and juries. So I know what it's like to go before judges. I know what it's like to go before juries. And I'm the only one in this Democratic primary that has that. The congressman's been a politician, which again is admirable. But for this position, that's just not enough.
Thank you. So we have one more clip before we play the set. We have one more question before we play the second clip, and that question is: how do you see yourself helping the Eastern Shore as Attorney General?
So I've been as a kid every summer going to the Eastern Shore, in Ocean City, and then working in Ocean City, so that I could pay for college. And I've talked to, from the beginning of the time that I got into this campaign, with people, from Dorchester, from Talbot, and talking about the issues that are affecting people on the shore, whether it's the crime rate that's rising, which I know all too much about from being here in Baltimore, or also pollution. And so I really think it's important that you have somebody that's been here, that understands the issues that are facing people here on the shore, and make sure that we use the laws that we have on the books, whether it's from crime or the environment, to make sure that we're using the laws that we already have on the books to make sure that we are getting the best that we can when it comes to public safety and when it comes to our environment, really, really making the farmers are getting the tools that they need to keep the environment safe. So whether it's cover crops, making sure that we give tax advantages to farmers so that they can use, whatever advantages they have to make so that they're not polluting. Trying to be a partner, I think, is the best way to describe it, rather than necessarily being an enforcer. But when enforcement needs to be done, you really need to have the Attorney General's office using the tools to make sure that enforcement is being taken care of, so that our land, our air, and our water is not being polluted.
Wonderful. So we have a second clip to share with you and the audience. Can we run that clip, please?
When it comes to crime, criminal justice reform, I bring to the table being in the courtrooms for 30 years, dealing with these issues and seeing what things work and what doesn't work. As a prosecutor, everyone thinks like, oh, you're a prosecutor and it's all about locking people up. Well, it's really not. It's about finding solutions for people, making sure people are safe, that your victims are safe. At the same time, looking at a defendant and trying to create holistic ways of handling that person, as whether they should or shouldn't go to jail, what opportunities would they have? Is parole and probation working effectively to supervise and get people into drug treatment programs?
So you bring up an excellent comment on there, and you say it's more than just locking people up. How do you believe, you mentioned it's not just locking people up. How do you believe the criminal justice system should work?
So it's a complicated system, but what I have found from being a part of it for 30 years is that the more services that you have for people, the better the outcomes. Simply putting someone in jail is not the answer. And I've seen that because I've been a prosecutor, I've been a judge, and the last tool in my box was always having to put someone in jail, not because they were harming themselves, only because they were harming someone else in the community. And so when we have the issues that we have, whether it's mental health issues, drug addiction issues, homelessness, human trafficking issues with women and men being prostituted against their will, we found in Baltimore City that we could solve those problems through services. And we did a really good job of doing that before the pandemic. And even after the pandemic, trying to put those pieces back together again. So, in the criminal justice system, people that get into the system because of other issues, whether it's homelessness, veterans treatment court, mental health issues, or drug addiction, we need to be a partner in finding stakeholders in the community to partner with us so that we can get those services. And I did that in drug treatment court. My colleagues did that in mental health court and did it in veterans treatment court. So I want to work as the Attorney General to strengthen those services so that we are, in fact, getting people where they need to be so they can be productive for their friends and their families, for themselves. And that's something I'm committed to doing. Criminal justice system needs to be something in a holistic way. But when it comes to public safety, and there are other issues when we're talking about rape, robbery, and murder, we have to start looking at ways to keep communities safe. And we know here in Baltimore City, and I'm sure all across our state, we know that violent crime is on the rise. We have to get guns off the street. We need to make sure there's enforcement when it comes to the repeat violent offenders. That's something we have to really work with our state, local, and federal law enforcement to get a handle of, because too many lives are being lost every single day. So many victims, and it's got to stop. It's a public health problem.
Thank you. One aspect of the community, the Attorney General's office that doesn't get talked about, maybe because it's not the prettiest issue, for lack of better terms, is how would you handle consumer protections and antitrust issues as Attorney General?
So I think it's a really exciting area. Thanks, Jared. Consumer protection is one of the largest divisions of the Attorney General's office. And that is the division that really started with the tobacco litigation, where we're still getting restitution from the tobacco industry now. So that that lawsuit all stemmed from the consumer protection laws that we have here in Maryland, as well as the opioid settlement that just happened when Attorney General Frosch entered into that lawsuit against the Sackler and Purdue Pharma industry with other states. So using our consumer protection laws on big and small issues is something that the AG's office has been doing since 1972 every single day. So whether it's a dispute with a small business or whether it's something I'd like to look into, which is going after gun manufacturers and gun shop owners that negligently advertise to consumers their products, and the seen as a result of gun violence, especially when it comes to automatic rifles. So I think the consumer protection is a really exciting area. Am I freezing up?
No, you're good. We can still hear you, see you.
So no, it's an exciting area, and it's a place where consumers can really, really get restitution from big issues, whether it's student loans, whether it's TurboTax violating people's consumer protection rights in advertising, or whether it's the heroin issue with the Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family. So I think it's a great way for the AG to really promote consumers' rights.
Thank you. I just want to remind folks who are watching, and I'm sure folks might see me peering over to the right on my screen, is we have folks on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. If you have a question for Judge O'Malley, just put it in the chat and we will actually read it. We're now closing in on 7. We still have some other questions, but if you have any questions from the audience, please put them in the chat and we will read them as soon as we get them. With that, we actually have a question from Dorchester County here on Twitter. And they ask, How will you protect the Eastern Shore from environmental issues while also working with agricultural organizations and businesses within the area?
So we need to make sure that the laws that are on the books are being enforced. So making sure that all businesses, all farming businesses are in compliance with the law and helping them. I know when my husband was the governor, there were incentives for cover crops, so not mandating that farmers use cover crops to keep the nitrogen and phosphorus and ammonia from going into the waterways, but giving benefits to farmers that did that. So making sure we have policies that actually help the industry, not just penalize it, is a start. But then also, over the past 8 years, the Department of Environment really hasn't been staffed enough so that we could make sure that farming was complying with the regulations they're supposed to. So we need now to make sure, and there are laws that were just put in action last year with the legislature to make sure that we're not administratively letting permits go to individuals when they're not in compliance with the regulations when it comes to nitrogen and phosphorus and ammonias being put into our waterways. So we need to start enforcing the laws, but looking at ways to work with farmers so that we can be partners. We all want the same thing. We want our environment to be safe. We want our farmers to prosper, but we certainly don't want pollution. And so we need to work together and make sure that we're all getting to the same end.
Thank you. The next question comes from Wacomico County, and it's funny they bring this up. Here on the shore, this is from Wacomico County. Here on the shore, your yard signs are everywhere, and it seems like you have a lot of bipartisan support. How did you bring this? How did you build this broad coalition, and how do you see it helping you get to victory?
Well, thanks. I've been down to the shore now at least 4 or 5 times. But again, before running for office, I am a Marylander, and I've gone to the shore every summer, and I've worked on the shore throughout my teen and early 20s so that I could, support myself through college and get myself extra income. So I love the Eastern Shore. It's one of the most beautiful parts of our state, and we're so lucky that we have it. And, as my kids have grown up, they've also followed in my footsteps. Two daughters worked in Ocean City. My sons didn't, but I actually took them to Assateague Island to help me do some oyster reclamation work. And so we have a deep love for the Eastern Shore as just being a Marylander. And so I've had friends, throughout the years that have been supportive of my husband as well as of me. And so I'm happy to have that support. I've been down to the shore now during this campaign many times and will gladly come back. Just within the past month, I was in Ocean City twice for the State Bar Convention and then the Maryland Municipal League. But I was at Salisbury University twice for the Senate, once for the Senator Sarbanes event, and then for a debate that we had for the Attorney General's candidates, and then just visited Easton and it was just lovely to be there. My niece lives in Cambridge, so we have lots of friends that we've cultivated over the years. So I'm happy for the support.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of everyone here at the LSPC, you're always welcome to come down and do an event at any time. Just let us know what works for you. I also know your family comes down here quite a bit. I actually went to school with your son, Will, so we were in class together for a couple of years. The next question we have comes from Brian, who is a local podcaster who I believe you have met, who does shore issues. He could not be with us tonight, but he did send in a clip.
Hi, Katie. It's great to be able to have the opportunity to ask you more questions. Thanks to Lower Shore Progressives for the opportunity. The first question I had today was, what can you do as AG if and when the Supreme Court says that assault rifle bans are unconstitutional? The second question I have is, can you do anything as AG to change the language of our law to obligate the police to intervene in the event of school shootings that happen in Maryland? As we've seen in Uvalde, this is not the case because of some recent precedents that have been set. Gonzalez versus Castle Rock or DeShaney versus Winnebago County, in which Scalia says that police actions are procedural in of themselves and not necessarily meant to be remedies to any specific actions. Can we change the letter of our law to obligate the police to intervene in the event of school shootings or in the event of boyfriends that have restraining orders abducting children and then murdering them, as with Gonzalez versus Castle Rock? Thank you for answering my questions, and thank you to Lower Shore Progressives for the opportunity.
So thanks, Brian, for the question. The last one is the one that is actually in my mind the most, and that is what happened in Uvalde was a massive error. And I believe the New York Times just published a article about that today, stating that that was procedurally wrong. None of the training for any police agency has ever said that you should stay outside of an incident, especially in a school with children. Not that any other incident would be different, but you're dealing with small little children in a school, and we saw what happened in Columbine, and we saw what happened in Sandy Hook. So this was a massive failing on law enforcement. This is not what they're trained to do. Each state has policies. Each state has active shooter training. And attorney generals certainly in a state can influence that when they believe that it's not effective. Fortunately, we haven't seen something like that in Maryland, but that's not to say we won't. So we need to make sure that we have in each jurisdiction a sort of general policy on what we need to do and what has to be done in these incidences of emergency. Again, I've been through active shooter training in the judiciary because all big agencies have to do that, sadly, because of the assault rifles. So your first question gets at what will the Supreme Court do when it comes to these weapons? I know that they are thinking, or they're actually going to be issuing a decision as to whether or not you have to have a wear and carry permit and whether or not you have to show reasonable grounds for that. That's where they're likely to make the next decision, saying that you shouldn't have to have any governmental intrusion into your right to have a firearm on your person when you're walking through the streets, which is ridiculous. You should. The automatic weapons is going to be something that I think Americans all across the board are going to be going to the ballot boxes and making decisions about who they want to elect. We can't have these weapons. There's no reason, like I said earlier tonight, that anyone should have an assault rifle. Certainly not an 18-year-old, certainly not a 21-year-old, or a 35 or 55-year-old. No one. So these age restrictions are just absurd. We need to work really, really hard to get them banned in our country, and I will do everything in my power as Attorney General to work to that end. And also to work towards using our consumer protection laws to go after these industries that promote these weapons and that advertise these weapons to minors and to individuals in a negligent way, which is how we got the settlement, or how in Connecticut they were able to get the settlement against Remington because of the Sandy Hook shooting. So I think we need now to start using the consumer protection laws to protect Americans, Marylanders, all across the board when it comes to fighting against these weapons.
Thank you for answering that question. The next question we have, so earlier in the show, we shared a little bit about why our organization here at the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus decided to support your candidacy. The big question for us is, what about the LSPC? Why did you actually come seek an endorsement from us?
Well, again, Jared, it's because of, I grew up in Maryland. I love my state. I certainly grew up here in Baltimore City and raised my kids here. But part of the time that my kids were little, they were also in Annapolis, where they were close to the Chesapeake Bay. And almost every weekend during the summer, my husband would take my kids paddleboarding, and I would take them to Assateague, and I would, we certainly vacationed on the shore as much and as often as possible, because that's what I did as a kid. And so I have always felt a connection to the Eastern Shore. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world to me. And we need to make sure that we keep it beautiful and that we don't let development overtake it. I mean, we've seen kind of what's happened with Ocean City, and we've seen a push to do that in other areas of the shore. And we actually really need to make it so that our Eastern Shore is conserved, so that we have the beauty that it has in St. Michael's, so that we have the beauty in Oxford. That's where my husband and I had our right after we got married. That's where we went. That was our sort of after we got married. We didn't go on a honeymoon. We went to Oxford, which was a honeymoon. And so it's just making sure that we conserve the shore and make sure that the life on the shore is as beautiful as it's always been, and keeping it for the next generations to enjoy the way that I used to enjoy it as a kid.
Perfect. So, funny thing is, so I just received a text from one of our supporters, but it's such a great compliment. I have to share it with you. One of our supporters in Somerset said it's hard to come up with questions. She explains everything so well. So that is a really funny message I just got. But yeah, folks do have more questions. Please put them in the chat. But apparently, you're explaining things so well, you're stumping some folks down in Somerset, which I believe is a good thing. So thank you for being so thorough in your explanations. With that said, the next question we have here is also along similar lines. Do you consider yourself a progressive? And what does being a progressive mean to you if you do consider yourself a progressive?
Well, it's funny because as I was growing up in Baltimore and went to school in the county with kids, my parents had sent me to a school in Baltimore County after I'd been in public schools here. And I was always considered a bleeding heart liberal, which was a badge that I always have worn very proudly. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being a liberal, whether you call it a bleeding heart or not. I think being liberal and being progressive, I mean, who wants to be regressive? It just doesn't make any sense. We always want to be moving forward when we're talking about society, when we're talking about communities, when we're talking about government. I mean, if we weren't moving forward, we wouldn't have the internet. I mean, you have to constantly be moving forward because law is not static. Law is always changing based on circumstances, based on the pandemic, based on all kinds of issues that happen day in and day out. That's the great thing about government and politics. It's not always staying the same, and you have to continually move forward to progress people and to progress people's rights. That's why we no longer have slavery. That's why we have issues that we haven't necessarily moved beyond the way we need to when it comes to systemic racism. But we, as a community and as a public and as a government, need to constantly be pushing that so that we're not stagnant, so that we're not keeping things the same. When I first started as a prosecutor in Baltimore County, I think there was one woman judge on the bench. It was all white men. Not that there's anything wrong with white men, but that wasn't the makeup of the county. People were coming before judges and they weren't seeing judges that reflected the diversity of the community. We need to make sure that government reflects the diversity of our population. That's one of the greatest things about our state, that we're so diverse. And we need to continue to work towards making sure we have, ethnicities are represented. We need to make sure race, gender, everything's represented. We need to make sure that our LGBTQ rights are all being addressed and moving forward as opposed to backward. So that's why I'm glad to be a progressive. Nobody should be regressive.
Thank you. Our next question is, I know you've mentioned, you kind of alluded to it in your last question, and there's plenty of stuff on your site on this, but what are some of the key issues? Because it sounds like you have a plan for everything, but what would you say are the maybe three key things you're focusing on?
Well, that's nice of you to say. I don't necessarily have a plan for everything because you never know, like I said. But I think what's really important right now for Marylanders is criminal justice reform at the same time that we have public safety. And oftentimes people think that it's a choice, that you have to either emphasize public safety versus reform. You don't. You have to do both at the same time. And if you don't do both of these things at the same time, there's a problem. So we need to make sure we're keeping communities safe, at the same time, police accountable and transparent. So those are two things that throughout my career I have worked on from the time that I was a prosecutor, from the last day that I sat on the bench in Baltimore City after 20 years. So it's something we have to continually work on and make sure that we're keeping communities safe and keeping the police accountable. We also have to make sure we are working so diligently to fight against climate change, because the window is definitely narrowing. And today I was really happy and pleased to get the endorsement of the League of Conservation Voters for Maryland. And it's an important endorsement because it shows they understand my commitment to making sure our laws here in Maryland address climate change. And our legislature just passed one of the most significant laws when it comes to Climate Solutions Now Act, and making sure that that's implemented so that we can move from our independence on fossil fuel companies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So those are areas that I think are really imperative, moving our state forward and moving our country forward.
Thank you. Actually, we do have a clip on the environment. This is actually the last clip for the evening. Tyler, do you mind running that?
Candidate O'Malley, what are your environmental and climate priorities, and what are your strategies for implementation?
The priorities are going to be quite simply protecting Marylanders against contamination of our air, our water, and our land from toxic chemicals and from agribusiness pollution. These are very big, ambitious goals, but we have to do it. And we have to do it by making and working with the laws that we have here in the state of Maryland and enforcing them. Just as I stated earlier, the past 8 years under Governor Hogan, he has not been a big proponent for the environment. And what we have seen is a lack of staffing and a lack of priority when it comes to his administration on keeping our land and our air and our water clean. And so my priority would be, again, to enforce the good laws that we already have on the book and go back to the Chesapeake Clean Water Blueprint and start making real efforts to decrease the amount of pollution that we've set goals for.
As you mentioned in that clip, Governor Hogan has not been a fighter for the environment. How do you envision yourself as the next Attorney General, potentially working with the next governor to kind of undo some of the mistakes of the past, but also making sure we're protecting the environment in the future?
So, I would follow the blueprint of Attorney General Frosh, knowing that he did not have a partner when it came to the environment. Governor Hogan is a nice man, but he's a commercial developer. He's into development, and that's sometimes because of the profiteering from that business really doesn't sit well with environmentalists, and it doesn't necessarily consider the environmental costs of development. I know in Trap right now, they are facing a big battle over the 2,500 homes that are being proposed to be built in Trap, Maryland, with no coordination with the community as to the wastewater treatment, to schooling, to supermarkets, and to traffic. And, all of us know that Route 50 can be very congested during the summer, and I'm quite sure it can be very congested during off season as well. So we need to collaborate all across the board when it comes to state government, the Department of the Environment, the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Planning, so that when anybody suggests that there should be development, private companies like the Hogan Industries, I think it's called, that are doing something in Easton, or the development in Trap, that there is considerable consideration as to how this is going to affect the communities there and the environment. What are you going to do about the trees that you're going to be taking down, which we all know, absorb so much of the water that is a part of the sea rise that we're all going to be facing because of climate change. All of these issues have to be handled in a comprehensive way. And I, as Attorney General, will work diligently to make sure that the next administration, Democratic, I'm hopeful, or Republican, keeps that in consideration, and also make apparent and transparent to Marylanders what the effects of development are on all of our counties, so that people understand what is happening if A, B, and C company is starting to build certain areas and development, and are they taking into consideration climate change, and working with the legislature to make sure that becomes law, not just a suggestion, but law. You cannot build unless these considerations are taken care of. So these are areas that we, again, I think are all as a state, and we've got a great General Assembly. I think we have some very, very good, smart legislators who understand the importance of this, and I'm really eager to work with them.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions before we move into closing statements at 7:20. The next question comes from council member from the town of Hebron here in Wacomico County, Michelle Neal. She asked, how closely would your office work with formerly known GOCCP in regards to juvenile justice reform, considering that initiative that has been coming out of that office?
So the Juvenile Justice Monitoring Unit is housed in the Attorney General's office. And the governor's office certainly has their own agenda, and they have their own Secretary of Juvenile Justice. They have the budget, and they control really what happens when it comes to juvenile justice reform, if any, uh, resources, and what those resources are and how they address children who get into the juvenile justice system. There's a lot of work to be done there. I have read from 2016 up into 2022 the reports, the quarterly reports that have come through the Attorney General's office, which again doesn't supervise the Juvenile Justice Monitoring Unit, but the unit is housed in the AG's office. And that's a legislative mandate. I'm not sure actually how that came about. But again, the AG's office reports on these findings. Nothing's really changed. We really need to do so much more to address issues when it comes to juvenile justice, not just warehousing kids, but if children are getting into the system, if they're going to be detained, then we have to make sure that they're not just being put in cages. We've got to make sure they're educated. We have to make sure their mental health issues are being taken care of, because so many times kids are committing crimes based on issues of trauma. So we have to make sure that those things are being taken care of, their education, their health, and in a way that's not further traumatizing them, so that when they are released, that they're no better off. And also making sure when they're released, if they have mental health issues, that they're receiving that aftercare, because you can't give somebody mental health treatment and then release them and expect that things are going to be okay once they re-enter. So these are all issues that we have to really come together here in Maryland and work on together with the legislature, as well as with our next governor, to make sure that the system is funded and children are treated as children, so that they can leave the system and then be productive adults one day.
Thank you. We have one more question before closing statements, but I did want to share two quick comments with you. Michelle Johnson of Talbot County says, congratulations, Katie, on the LCV endorsement. That is huge. Marie from Berlin says, would be great to have such an accomplished person representing us as Attorney General. So looks like you at least got two voters out of this. The final question that we have for you this evening is, what do you want your legacy to be?
That's a hard thing to ask, but I think if I'm elected, I want to be seen as someone who is fair and someone who is really working towards progressive ends, especially when it comes to keeping our communities safe. The city of Baltimore that I love, where I grew up, we're facing so many tragedies every single day, where mothers and fathers are losing their children. A 17-year-old was buried after his prom, in his prom suit. So I truly, truly am dedicated to making sure we save lives all across our state, that no one loses their life from violence. So that's something I'm dedicated, and I'm hoping to work so hard, passionately, to make sure happens, as well as protecting our environment for the next generations. We're not going to be here forever, right? We've got people before us, and we get to see history. We get to see what our forefathers and mothers have done for us. And I want to make sure that we are giving our environment, our children, the environment, and our grandchildren, the environment that they deserve. So those are two areas that I'd like to have as a legacy.
Thank you, and we'll turn it back over to you for any closing remarks or thoughts you want to leave us with this evening.
Well, Jared, thank you so much for having me here this evening and listening to me talk about my vision for the Attorney General's office. Again, I've been working as a public service lawyer for the past 30 years, working in courts with real people who have real problems day in and day out, as a prosecutor and then as a judge. And as a mom of four kids, and a wife and a sister and a daughter, I have a lot of visions for our state that I've grown up in and that I love. And as a lawyer, I want to make sure that, again, we have communities that are safe, that we have people protected from fraud, and that we have an environment that's clean and safe for the next generations and for our generation, and that we do everything we possibly can to combat climate change. So I'm very, very passionate about those issues and excited about this race. We only have 27 days left. And so we are getting out and talking to as many people in person and virtually as possible about why I should be your next Attorney General. Again, I'm the only one that has the experience in our courts. And for Attorney General, when you're leading 450 lawyers that go to court every single day, I think, and I believe the voters of Maryland think, that that's really important. And that's why the Washington Post endorsed me, as well as the League of Conservation Voters, as well as Barbara Mikulski, our famous senator from Baltimore, and so many other endorsements like Emily's List. So I hope you go on our website, katieformd.com, to learn more about me and my race and volunteer or ask for a lawn sign. Again, hope to get to the shore very soon to see everyone. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Judge O'Malley. And to kind of close this evening, I'll give a few closing statements as chair. As Judge O'Malley mentioned, please visit her website, katieformd.com. Also, check out lowershoreprogressives.com and see what we're doing. We have plenty of ways to volunteer with us. We're going to go ahead and post the link on our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube after this event. We are door knocking every day. Right after this event, right before this event, I was door knocking with some folks for Katie and our other endorsed candidates. We could definitely use you on the doors in the next 20 days or at Juneteenth this weekend. Also, I would strongly ask, if you wanted to support progressive candidates like Katie who are running for office, please consider donating to the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus PAC. Every single dollar we raise stays right here on the Eastern Shore to elect good candidates and grow the movement. And finally, once again, I hope you'll be willing to check out our website. I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart on behalf of everyone from the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus leadership for attending this evening. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a safe evening and remainder of your week, and I hope you will go vote for all the great progressive candidates we've endorsed during the July 19th primary. Thank you all so much for your time, and have a wonderful evening.